Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the wide window of Harmony Point Station, watching the alien ships drift through space like giant metal whales. 3 years had passed since humanity first met the Kytheran Empire. 3 years of careful words, patient smiles, and endless meetings. Today felt different, though. Today, the Kytheran Emperor himself would attend their talks. Elena touched the small device on her collar. It would translate her words into the clicking, hissing sounds that the Kytherans called language. She had spent months learning their customs. Never look directly at a Kytheran's throat. Always bow exactly 15 degrees when greeting. Bring gifts, but never anything red. The list went on and on. Ambassador, called Captain Sarah Chen from across the room. The Kytheran delegation is approaching Dock 7. Elena nodded. Sarah commanded the small fleet of human ships that protected the diplomatic mission. The young captain never relaxed her guard. Even during peaceful meetings, Elena sometimes thought Sarah worried too much. The Kytherans had agreed to these talks. They wanted peace as much as humanity did. The main hall of Harmony Point buzzed with activity. Diplomats from a dozen neutral worlds had come to witness this historic meeting. Some looked excited. Others seemed worried. Everyone knew this moment would shape the future of the galaxy. The Kytherans entered through the main airlock like a parade of living armor. Each one stood 7 feet tall, covered in dark green scales that caught the light like polished metal. Their long necks swayed as they walked, and their yellow eyes missed nothing. At their head walked someone Elena had only seen in photographs before, Emperor Kethix himself. The massive alien wore robes of deep purple marked with golden symbols. Smaller Kytherans followed behind him, their heads bowed low. Elena had learned that Kytheran society worked like a pyramid. The Emperor stood at the top. Everyone else existed to serve him. Elena stepped forward and bowed exactly 15 degrees. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said. "Humanity welcomes you to these talks. We hope today begins a long friendship between our peoples." The Emperor's translator device crackled to life. "Your words are noted, human," came the mechanical voice. Emperor Kethix studied Elena like a scientist examining a new kind of bug. His yellow eyes showed no warmth. The formal ceremony began. Elena presented humanity's gifts to the Emperor. Medical technology that could heal diseases affecting Kytheran children. Agricultural methods that could feed billions more people on Kytheran worlds. Star charts showing safe routes through dangerous space regions that humanity had mapped. Each gift represented years of human research and development. Elena had hoped to see some reaction from the Emperor. Instead, he barely glanced at the offerings before waving a clawed hand. Smaller Kytherans quickly gathered up the gifts and carried them away. "We will consider your offerings," the Emperor said through his translator. The words sounded polite, but his tone suggested he was doing humanity a favor by even looking at them. The talks continued for hours. Elena proposed trade agreements that would benefit both species. She suggested cultural exchanges where humans and Kytherans could learn from each other. She outlined scientific partnerships that could unlock the secrets of the universe. The Emperor listened without speaking. Occasionally, he would lean over to whisper something to one of his advisors. Elena caught glimpses of their natural language, sharp clicks, and soft hisses that sounded like angry snakes. When Elena finished her presentation, the hall fell silent. Everyone waited for the Emperor's response. The massive alien rose from his chair, towering over the human delegation. "Your species shows enthusiasm," he said finally. "This is unexpected from such a young race. We have ruled among the stars for thousands of years, while your kind still lived in caves." Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. "Every species begins somewhere, Your Majesty. We believe our newness brings fresh ideas to old problems." Perhaps, the Emperor's throat sac puffed out slightly. Elena had learned this meant amusement among Kytherans. "We will study your proposals. If any prove useful, we may agree to limited arrangements." The formal talks ended there. As the delegations moved to separate chambers, Elena felt both hope and frustration. The Emperor had not rejected humanity's offers outright, but he had not embraced them either. Still, this was just the beginning. Real diplomacy took time. Captain Chen approached as the Keitharans filed out. "How do you think it went?" she asked quietly. "Hard to tell," Elena admitted. "They're very formal, very proud. But the Emperor seemed interested in our medical technology." Sarah nodded. But Elena noticed her watching the Keitharan delegation carefully. "Their ships have been running active scans of our vessels all day," Sarah said. "Deep scans. The kind you use to find weak spots in armor. They're probably just curious about our technology," Elena replied. "Wouldn't we do the same? Maybe." Sarah did not look convinced. "I'll keep monitoring their activities, just in case." Later that evening, Elena sat in her quarters, reviewing recordings of the day's meetings. The Emperor's words played again in her mind. His tone had been polite, but something underneath felt wrong, like he was speaking to a child who had brought him broken toys. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's chief scientist on the mission, entered carrying a data pad. "Elena, I've been analyzing the Keitharan responses to our medical technology," he said. "Something strange is happening." "What do you mean?" Marcus showed her the data pad. "Our scanners detected that several Keitharans in the delegation suffer from genetic diseases. Diseases our medical technology could cure completely, but when the Emperor saw our equipment, his biosigns showed no excitement, no interest, nothing." Elena frowned. "Maybe they already have treatments for those diseases?" "That's just it. They don't. Our intelligence confirms that these genetic problems kill millions of Keitharans every generation. Yet the Emperor acted like our cure was worthless." Elena stared at the data. Why would anyone reject technology that could save lives? Unless, Marcus, run a simulation. If the Keitharan Empire wanted to conquer humanity, what would they need to know first? Marcus's face went pale. "Our ship designs, our weapon systems, our military capabilities." He paused. "Everything they've been scanning today." Elena felt cold fear growing in her chest. Had humanity's peaceful approach been seen as weakness? Were the Keitharans studying their potential enemies rather than seeking friends? Outside her window, the Keitharan fleet hung in space like sleeping predators. For the first time since arriving at Harmony Point, Elena wondered if humanity had made a terrible mistake. The talks would continue tomorrow. Elena would smile and offer more gifts and speak more words of peace. But tonight, she began to understand that some species might see kindness as nothing more than opportunity. In the distance, Emperor Kithix's flagship slowly rotated in the starlight. Its weapons remained powered down, following the rules of diplomatic meetings, but Elena could not shake the feeling that those weapons were only sleeping, not truly at rest. 5 years had passed since the first meeting at Harmony Point. Ambassador Elena Vasquez now worked from the human embassy station, orbiting the neutral world of Median Prime. The station had grown into a small city, filled with diplomats, scientists, and trade representatives from both species. Elena walked through the market district where humans and Keitharans conducted business together. At first glance, everything looked peaceful. Human farmers sold grain to Keitharan merchants. Keitharan artists traded sculptures for human music. Children from both species played together in the station's parks. But Elena had learned to look deeper. The Keitharan merchants always demanded better prices than anyone else received. When humans objected, the Keitharans would claim cultural misunderstandings. The trade agreements heavily favored the Empire, but Keitharan negotiators insisted this was normal between an advanced civilization and a developing one. Most troubling were the incidents in space. 3 times in the past year, Keitharan warships had appeared in human shipping lanes. Each time, the Keitharan commanders claimed navigation errors. Each time, the ships had fully charged weapons and active targeting systems. Elena's assistant, David Park, approached with the morning reports. "Another incident near the Centauri trade route," he said quietly. "Keitharan heavy cruiser intercepted the cargo ship, Times New Hope **. held them for 6 hours while conducting safety inspections. Elena sighed. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. What did they take this time? Complete cargo manifest. Detailed scans of the ship's computer systems. They also demanded to know the ship's destination and cargo value. David paused. The captain says they were particularly interested in the medical supplies bound for the Tau Ceti colony. These inspections worried Elena more than direct attacks might have. The Kitharans were gathering information about human trade routes, cargo types, and ship capabilities. They claimed it was for mutual security, but Elena had studied enough military history to recognize intelligence gathering when she saw it. A chime announced an incoming message. The screen showed Admiral Sarah Chen calling from Earth's Orbital Defense Command. Sarah had been promoted after proving her worth during the early diplomatic missions. "Elena, we need to talk," Sarah said without preamble. "3 of our deep space research vessels have gone missing near Kitharan territory. The Times Aurora ***, Discovery ***, and Times Pathfinder ***. All 3 were conducting scientific surveys when they disappeared." Elena felt her stomach drop. "Any word from the crews?" "Nothing. The Kitharans claim they know nothing about missing human ships. They suggest our crews might have encountered natural hazards, like asteroid fields or solar flares. 3 ships in 3 months? That's not coincidence." Sarah nodded grimly. "Our analysis suggests the ships were intercepted, not destroyed by natural causes. We've detected faint distress signals from the Times Aurora ***, but they cut off abruptly." Elena closed her eyes. 36 human beings had vanished while conducting peaceful research. Families on Earth waited for news that might never come, and the Kitharans acted as if nothing had happened. "Sarah, I know what you're thinking, but we can't abandon diplomacy yet. If we start making accusations without proof—" "I'm not talking about accusations," Sarah interrupted. "I'm talking about preparation. The Kitharans have been pushing boundaries for months, testing our responses, seeing how far they can go before we fight back. Maybe they're just cautious. They've probably dealt with aggressive species before." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Elena, I respect what you're trying to do. But look at the pattern. The trade deals that favor them, the navigation errors in our shipping lanes, the missing research ships, and now they're demanding that we hand over control of our defense satellites as a gesture of good faith." Elena had received that demand 2 days ago. The Kitharan Emperor claimed that humanity's defensive systems made them nervous. As a sign of trust, he wanted humans to transfer control of their orbital defense network to neutral Kitharan oversight. The request had shocked Earth's leadership. Those satellites protected humanity's homeworld and colonies from asteroids, space debris, and potential attacks. Giving them up would leave humanity completely vulnerable. "They know we can't agree to that demand," Elena said slowly. "So why ask?" "Because they want us to refuse," Sarah replied. "Then they can claim we're the ones being unreasonable, that we don't really want peace." Elena walked to the embassy's main observation deck. Below, Median Prime's blue oceans sparkled in the sunlight. The world had been chosen as neutral ground because it had no intelligent life and no strategic value. A place where species could meet without fear or suspicion. Now Elena wondered if anywhere was truly safe. Dr. Marcus Webb found her there an hour later. The scientist looked older than his years, his hair now mostly gray from stress and long hours. He carried a datapad filled with research that Elena suspected she did not want to hear. "I've been studying Kitharan expansion patterns over the past 1,000 years, Marcus said without greeting. "The data comes from archaeological sites, refugee populations, and historical records from species they've conquered." "Conquered? I thought they built their empire through alliances and trade agreements." Marcus's laugh held no humor. "That's what they tell everyone. But the evidence shows a different story. 47 species have joined the Kitharan Empire. In the past millennium, 47. Elena felt cold despite the warm sunlight streaming through the observation windows. Where are they now? Gone, extinct, absorbed into the Empire so completely that they might as well have never existed. Marcus activated his data pad, showing Elena pictures of dead worlds. The pattern is always the same. First contact, trade negotiations, cultural exchanges, then increasing demands for tribute and submission. Species that resist disappear. Species that submit become slave workers until they're no longer useful. Elena stared at the images of empty cities and silent worlds. Why hasn't anyone reported this? Why doesn't the galaxy know? Because the Kithorans are very careful about who they allow to visit their territory. They show diplomats and trade representatives exactly what they want them to see. Happy, prosperous worlds where different species work together. What they don't show are the processing facilities. Processing facilities? Marcus hesitated, then showed Elena another set of images. These had been captured by an automated probe that had malfunctioned and drifted into restricted Kithoran space. The pictures showed massive industrial complexes built around what looked like slaughterhouses. Elena felt sick. What are they processing? According to the probe's biosensors, organic matter, large quantities of it. The chemical signatures match sentient species biology. Elena gripped the observation deck's railing to steady herself. The beautiful view of Median Prime blurred as tears filled her eyes. How many species had stood where she stood now? How many had tried to build bridges of friendship only to discover they were building their own funeral pyres? Marcus, have you shared this information with Earth? Admiral Chen has the complete files. So does the Security Council. They're debating whether to confront the Kithorans with the evidence or continue diplomatic efforts while secretly preparing for war. Elena thought about the families waiting for news of the missing research ships. She thought about the Kithoran demands for humanity's defense systems. She thought about the Emperor's cold yellow eyes during that first meeting 5 years ago. How long do we have? She asked quietly. Based on historical patterns, not long. The Kithorans usually begin open aggression once they feel they've learned enough about their target's capabilities. They've been studying us for 5 years now. Elena watched a Kithoran merchant ship dock at the station's commercial port. From this distance, it looked peaceful enough, but she now knew that appearance meant nothing when dealing with predators smart enough to hide their teeth until feeding time. That evening, Elena sent a coded message to Earth. 3 words that would change everything. Diplomacy has failed. She still hoped she was wrong, still wanted to believe that some solution existed that didn't involve bloodshed. But as she watched more Kithoran ships arrive at the station throughout the night, Elena began preparing for the possibility that humanity's patience had been mistaken for weakness. The next morning brought news that ended all remaining hope. The cargo ship Times, Providence *, carrying 400 human colonists to establish a new settlement, had vanished without a trace near Kithoran space. Elena stood at her office window watching the sunrise paint Median Prime's sky in shades of gold and red. Somewhere in that beautiful galaxy, an entire human colony ship had disappeared. 400 men, women, and children who had left Earth seeking new homes among the stars. The time for peaceful words was ending. Whether humanity wanted it or not, a different kind of conversation was about to begin. The rescue ship Times Endeavour Times drifted through the debris field, where the research vessel Times Aurora Times had been destroyed 3 months earlier. Captain Lisa Martinez guided her ship carefully through the wreckage, searching for any sign of survivors. Contact on long-range sensors, called her navigation officer. Looks like an escape pod. Martinez felt her heart race. After months of searching, they had found only empty space and twisted metal. The hope of finding anyone alive had nearly died. Get us alongside and prepare the docking bay. The pod looked like it had been through hell. Blast marks covered its hull, and several systems showed red warning lights. But the life support indicators still glowed green. Someone was alive in there. The pod's airlock cycled open with a hiss of stale air. 3 figures stumbled out, their faces pale and thin from months of survival rations. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the Times Aurora's Times chief scientist, collapsed to her knees as soon as she cleared the airlock. "Thank God," she whispered. "I thought we'd die out here." Martinez helped Dr. Walsh to the medical bay, while her crew assisted the other survivors. During the long journey back to human space, the three survivors told their story. What Martinez heard changed everything she thought she knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. Dr. Walsh spoke in a voice that shook with remembered terror. We were conducting routine surveys of the Kepler system when the Kitharan ships appeared. 6 heavy cruisers, all with weapons charged. They demanded we surrender for safety inspection. We complied, added Lieutenant James Foster, the Times Aurora's time security chief. What else could we do? We were a research vessel with no weapons. They transported us to what they called a processing station, Dr. Walsh continued. It looked like a space station, but bigger than anything I'd ever seen. When we got inside, she shuddered and couldn't continue. Lieutenant Foster picked up the story. They separated us by species. Humans in one area. There were others too. Beings I'd never seen before. All in cages. Martinez felt sick to her stomach. Cages? Metal cells, barely large enough to stand up in. The Kitharans called it temporary housing during evaluation. But we saw creatures that had been there for months. Maybe years. Dr. Walsh found her voice again. They were studying us. Taking blood samples, brain scans, genetic material. One of the Kitharan scientists told me they needed to understand our biology before proceeding to the next phase. What was the next phase? The 3 survivors exchanged dark looks. Lieutenant Foster answered. We never found out. But we saw the conveyor belts leading to the processing chambers. We heard the sounds coming from inside, and we smelled. He trailed off, his face green with remembered horror. Martinez ordered the survivors placed in protective isolation as soon as they reached human space. Their testimony was too important to risk losing to an accident or Kitharan rescue mission. 3 days later, Admiral Sarah Chen arrived aboard her flagship Defiance Times to interview the survivors personally. Elena Vasquez joined her via secure communication link from the diplomatic station where she was still trying to salvage some hope of peace. Dr. Walsh sat across from Admiral Chen in the ship's briefing room. Her hands shook as she activated a data recorder containing information she had smuggled out of the processing station. This contains everything I could gather about Kitharan operations, she said. Biological data on 47 species. All extinct now. All processed through facilities like the one where they held us. Admiral Chen reviewed the data with growing horror. Each file contained detailed information about a unique species. Their biology, culture, technology, and military capabilities, all leading to the same final entry. Processing complete. Biomass yields within acceptable parameters. Kretel, they're not an empire, Elena said via the communication link. They're farmers. And every other species in the galaxy is their crop. Dr. Walsh nodded. One of their scientists was very proud of their efficiency. He told me they had perfected the art of species management over thousands of years. First contact to final processing typically takes 15 to 20 years. Elena felt her world collapse around her. 15 years. That was exactly how long humanity had been attempting diplomatic relations with the Kitharans. The timeline was not coincidence. We have to warn the galaxy, Elena said. Other species need to know what the Kitharans really are. Admiral Chen's expression was grim. We've tried. Most galactic governments refuse to believe it. The Kitharans have spent centuries building their reputation as peaceful empire builders. Our accusations sound like the paranoid fears of a primitive species. Then we make one final attempt at peace, Elena said. I'll demand an audience with Emperor Kithix himself. Present him with the evidence. Give him one last chance to prove we're wrong. Elena, that's suicide. If they know we've discovered the truth, then at least the galaxy will see who fires the first shot. 2 weeks later, Elena stood in the throne room of the Kitharan flagship Times Eternal Dominion *. The massive chamber stretched out like a cathedral, its walls decorated with trophies from 1,000 conquered worlds. At the far end sat Emperor Kithix on a throne made from the bones of creatures Elena could not identify. The Emperor had grown larger since their first meeting 9 years earlier. His scales were now deep black instead of green, and his yellow eyes held the confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. Around him stood dozens of Ketheran nobles, their throat sacs puffed with anticipation. Elena walked forward alone, her diplomatic immunity the only thing protecting her in this den of killers. She carried a datapad containing Dr. Walsh's evidence and recordings of the survivors' testimony. "Your Imperial Majesty," Elena said, bowing the required 15 degrees. "I come to discuss the future of relations between our species." Emperor Kithix studied her like a cat watching a mouse. "How interesting. And what future do you imagine exists for your kind?" Elena activated the datapad and projected its contents into the air between them. Images of the processing stations appeared, along with biological data on extinct species and testimony from the Times Aurora Times survivors. "We know what you are," Elena said simply. "We know what happened to the 47 species that came before us. We know about the processing facilities and the systematic extermination of entire civilizations." The Emperor's throat sac inflated with what Elena now recognized as amusement. Several of the Ketheran nobles made clicking sounds that might have been laughter. "Your species has shown remarkable persistence in its delusions," the Emperor said. "This has been educational. We have learned much about human psychology, military capabilities, and social structures over these past years." Elena felt her last hope die. "So it's true. Everything we've discovered. Truth is a flexible concept," the Emperor replied. "We prefer to think of it as natural selection on a galactic scale. Strong species survive and flourish. Weak species become resources for the strong. Your kind has proven remarkably resourceful for primitives, but resources you remain. And if we refuse to submit?" The Emperor's massive head tilted slightly. "Refuse? You misunderstand your position. Submission was never an option. We required time to study your capabilities and plan appropriate countermeasures. That time has ended." Elena looked around the throne room at the trophies lining the walls. Weapons, artwork, and cultural artifacts from dozens of dead civilizations. Soon, human creations might join that grisly collection. "You're making a mistake," Elena said quietly. "Humanity is not like the species you've destroyed before. Every species believes itself unique," the Emperor replied. "They all discover otherwise during processing." Elena activated her personal communicator, broadcasting on all human emergency frequencies. "This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez. Diplomatic efforts have failed. The Ketheran Empire has declared its intention to process humanity like all previous species. Recommend immediate implementation of military protocols." Emperor Kithix showed no concern at Elena's message. "Your warning changes nothing. Our fleets already surround your major colonies. Your merchant vessels are being intercepted as we speak. Within days, your kind will learn the price of existing in our galaxy." Elena backed toward the exit, her diplomatic immunity still protecting her for now. "You have no idea what you're starting. We are ending nothing," the Emperor corrected. "Every war begins with hope and ends with submission. Your species will prove no different." Elena left the throne room and walked quickly toward her ship. Behind her, she could hear the clicking laughter of Ketheran nobles, celebrating the end of humanity's reprieve. They had played their parts perfectly, pretending to consider diplomacy while secretly preparing for slaughter. As Elena's diplomatic shuttle cleared the Ketheran flagship, she received the first reports from human space. Ketheran fleets had appeared simultaneously at 12 major human colonies. The attacks had begun. Elena set course for Earth, knowing she would probably never see home again. The Ketherans had spent 15 years studying humanity's weaknesses. Now they would discover what happened when a species famous for its adaptability was backed into a corner with nowhere to run. The age of diplomacy was over. The age of reckoning had begun. Behind her, Emperor Kithix's flagship began broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention human settlements. Lay down your arms and prepare for processing. Resistance will only prolong your suffering." Elena smiled grimly as she activated her ship's emergency beacon. The Emperor was about to learn the difference between studying humans and fighting them. It would be an education the Kitharan Empire would never forget. The Kitharan fleet commander Vextar watched the human colony of New Geneva burn below him. Orbital bombardment had reduced 3 major cities to ash within hours. According to Kitharan battle doctrine, the remaining humans should surrender within days. Instead, the humans fought back with a fury that Vextar had never encountered in 40 years of conquest. The first surprise came from the asteroid belt surrounding New Geneva's star. What appeared to be mining equipment suddenly revealed itself as a network of hidden weapons platforms. Massive railguns that had been disguised as ore processors opened fire on the Kitharan fleet. Vextar's flagship shuddered as human projectiles tore through its shields. "Impossible," he hissed to his tactical officer. Intelligence indicated no military installations in this system. "The humans appear to have converted civilian infrastructure into weapons," his officer replied. "Mining lasers have been modified into ship killers. Cargo haulers are launching guided missiles." A new voice cut across the Kitharan command frequency. Clear, calm, and speaking perfect Kitharan. "Kitharan vessels. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Force. You came here expecting to harvest sheep. You found wolves instead." Vextar clicked his throat in dismissal. Human bravado meant nothing against superior Kitharan firepower. Continue the bombardment. Eliminate their defensive positions. But the human positions were not there to be eliminated. As soon as Kitharan ships moved to attack one weapons platform, it would shut down and disappear while others activated from new locations. The humans had spent years building redundant systems hidden throughout their space. More troubling was the technology they used. Vextar recognized modified Kitharan shield generators, protecting human positions. Human ships fired weapons that used Kitharan energy patterns. Somehow, the humans had not only studied Kitharan technology during the years of false diplomacy, they had improved it. The battle for New Geneva lasted 6 days. By the end, half of Vextar's fleet was destroyed or disabled. The human colony was heavily damaged, but still fighting. Worse, human ships had begun appearing throughout Kitharan space, attacking supply lines and liberation facilities. Emperor Kithix received Vextar's report aboard his flagship with growing disbelief. In 800 years of conquest, no species had ever mounted effective resistance once the processing phase began. The humans were supposed to be primitive. Their weapons were supposed to be inferior. Their ships were supposed to flee in terror. Instead, human forces were systematically dismantling the greatest empire in galactic history. "How many systems have we lost contact with?" the Emperor demanded. 17, Your Majesty," reported his intelligence chief. "Human strike forces have liberated processing facilities throughout the outer territories. They are broadcasting evidence of our operations on all galactic frequencies." The Emperor's throat sac inflated with rage. "What evidence?" "Complete recordings of processing operations. Biological data on extinct species. Survivor testimonies. The humans have documented everything." This was worse than military defeat. For centuries, the Kitharan Empire had maintained power through careful image management. Other species saw them as advanced civilization builders, not genocidal predators. Now the humans were revealing the truth to the entire galaxy. "Deploy the reserve fleets," the Emperor ordered. "Every ship, every weapon. End this human pestilence before it spreads further." But the humans had anticipated this response. As Kitharan reinforcements moved toward human space, they found their targets had vanished. Human colonies that had existed for decades were simply gone. Their populations evacuated to hidden locations. Admiral Chen had learned the art of strategic retreat from studying humanity's own military history. Rather than defend fixed positions against superior forces, she scattered human civilians throughout space while concentrating military assets for hit-and-run attacks. The Kitharans found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stand still long enough to be destroyed. More troubling were the reports from processing facilities throughout the Empire. Species that had been enslaved for generations were rising in rebellion. The humans had somehow made contact with enslaved populations and provided them with weapons and tactical support. Commander Thekvar of Processing Station Omega-7 watched his screens in horror as the latest batch of prisoners broke free from their containment cells. These were Zelkani, a peaceful aquatic species that the Kitharans had been processing for 30 years. They should have been broken, hopeless, easy to manage. Instead, they fought with coordinated precision that spoke of outside training. They used improvised weapons with deadly efficiency. Most shocking of all, they seemed to believe they could win. How did they get free? Thekvar demanded of his security chief. Unknown, Commander. The containment systems show no signs of malfunction. The locks appear to have been opened from the outside. Thekvar activated the station's external sensors and felt his blood freeze. A human ship hung in space nearby, its hull scarred from battle, but its weapons very much functional. As he watched, the ship launched a spread of missiles toward the station's reactor core. The last transmission from Omega-7 was Thekvar's panicked voice. The humans are here. They're liberating the processing facilities. Similar reports flooded in from across the Empire. Processing Station Delta-3 destroyed. Processing Station Gamma-12 captured. Processing Station Alpha-9 under siege by a combined force of humans and liberated slaves. The Kitharan Empire had built its power on the systematic extermination of weaker species. Now those species had an ally willing and able to fight back. Dr. Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the liberated Kitharan facility that had once been known as Processing Station Beta-4. Around him, former prisoners worked alongside human engineers to convert the massive installation into a refugee center. Status report, Admiral Chen said via communication link. 47 different species represented among the survivors, Marcus replied. Some have been here for decades. The oldest prisoner I've interviewed was captured 60 years ago. Can they fight? Marcus looked around the facility's main hall, where representatives of dozens of species were meeting with human tactical officers. Admiral, you should see them. They're not just willing to fight. They're eager for it. The Kitharans have created their own worst nightmare. An entire galaxy full of species with nothing left to lose, and every reason to hate their oppressors. The tide of war was turning, but not in the way the Kitharans had expected. Their superior technology meant nothing against enemies who fought with desperate courage. Their numerical advantage crumbled as species after species joined the human-led rebellion. On the bridge of his flagship, Emperor Kithix received the latest reports with growing desperation. His empire was collapsing not from external conquest but from internal revolution. The humans had done more than resist. They had inspired hope in species that had forgotten such things existed. Your Majesty, his communications officer said hesitantly, we're receiving a transmission from the human Admiral Chen. She's requesting to speak with you directly. The Emperor's massive head swiveled toward the officer. Put her through! Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main screen. She wore the uniform of Earth's military, but her ship's bridge showed representatives from a dozen different species working together in harmony. Emperor Kithix, she said without ceremony, I'm transmitting the terms for your surrender. The Emperor's throat sac puffed with outrage. Surrender? You dare suggest that the Eternal Empire would bow to primitives? Your empire is dead, Chen replied calmly. 36 systems have declared independence. Your processing facilities are either destroyed or liberated. Your slave species are joining our alliance faster than we can arm them. We still control the core worlds. Our main fleets remain intact. Chen nodded. For now. But your species depends on those processing facilities for resources. Your economy depends on slave labor. Your military depends on conscripted soldiers from conquered species. All of that is gone. Then we will rebuild. We will adapt. We will crush your rebellion and grind your bones to dust. No, Chen said quietly. You won't. Because we're not offering you the chance to surrender to humanity. We're offering you the chance to surrender to justice. The screen changed to show the liberated species representatives gathered in what had once been Processing Station Alpha Prime. Dozens of beings that the Kitharans had tortured, enslaved, and nearly exterminated now sat in judgment of their former oppressors. These are the survivors of your genocide, Chen continued. They will decide your fate. Not humanity. Not the galactic community. The species you tried to destroy. Emperor Kithix stared at the screen in growing horror. This was not how conquest was supposed to work. Defeated species were supposed to disappear quietly into history. They were not supposed to return. Seeking justice. You have 48 hours to consider the terms, Chen said. After that, we begin the liberation of your core worlds. And Emperor? When we find your breeding facilities and genetic archives, when we document every atrocity you've committed across 1,000 years, there won't be a place in this galaxy where your kind can hide. The transmission ended, leaving Emperor Kithix alone with the ruins of his empire. Outside his flagship's windows, he could see the lights of human ships gathering like stars in the darkness. Behind them came vessels from species the Kytharans thought they had destroyed forever. For the first time in his long life, the Emperor of the greatest empire in galactic history felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. The humans had not just defeated the Kytharan Empire. They had awakened the sleeping conscience of the galaxy itself. And that conscience demanded justice for 800 years of systematic murder. The age of processing was over. The age of reckoning had truly begun. The Kytharan homeworld fell on a Tuesday, not to human weapons or orbital bombardment, but to something far more powerful, the voices of its own slaves. For 3 days, beings that the Kytharans had kept in underground labor camps broadcast testimonies across every communication frequency on the planet. Stories of children born into bondage. Stories of entire families processed for biological materials. Stories of cultures erased so completely that only a few elderly survivors remembered their original names. Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of the human command ship Times, Justice Times, and watched the massive Kytharan surrender ceremony taking place on the planet's surface. Below, Emperor Kithix knelt before a tribunal composed of representatives from every species his empire had enslaved or destroyed. The emperor's golden robes were gone. His ceremonial crown lay broken at his feet. For the first time in 800 years, a Kytharan ruler faced judgment from those he had considered nothing more than resources. "It's over," Admiral Sarah Chen said, joining Elena at the observation window. "The last Kytharan military commander signed the surrender documents an hour ago." Elena nodded but felt no celebration. Victory had come at a terrible cost. The war had lasted 2 years and claimed millions of lives on both sides. Entire human colonies had been destroyed in the fighting. Ancient alien cultures had been lost forever when the Kytharans destroyed their processing facilities rather than let their slaves escape. "What happens now?" Elena asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Now we face the hard part." Winning the war was the easy part compared to winning the peace. Over the following months, Elena learned exactly what Sarah meant. The collapse of the Kytharan Empire left a massive power vacuum in the galaxy. Hundreds of worlds that had been enslaved for generations suddenly found themselves free but with no idea how to govern themselves. Some species wanted revenge against every Kytharan they could find. Others demanded the complete destruction of Kytharan civilization. A few called for humanity to become the new galactic empire, ruling through strength, as the Kytharans had done. Elena found herself at the center of these debates as humanity's new director of galactic relations. The job had aged her 10 years in the past 6 months alone. Every day brought new crises, new demands, new species learning to hate each other after centuries of forced cooperation under Kytharan rule. The hardest decisions involved the Kytharans themselves. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent months studying Kytharan society and biology. His conclusions painted a complex picture that defied simple answers. "The Empire's caste system isn't just social," he explained to Elena during one of their regular briefings. "It's biological. The ruling class has been genetically modified over thousands of years to be larger, stronger, and more aggressive than the worker castes." Elena studied the data on her tablet. So the Emperor and his nobles were literally bred to be predators. Yes. But here's the important part. The worker castes weren't. They've been slaves as much as any other species in the Empire. When we liberated Kytharan worlds, the common citizens helped us overthrow their own rulers. This discovery complicated everything. How could the galaxy seek justice against an entire species, when most of that species had been victims themselves? The Galactic Liberation Accord, as historians would later call it, took 8 months to negotiate. Representatives from 93 species gathered on the neutral world of New Harmony to hammer out the framework for post-war civilization. Elena chaired the sessions, drawing on 15 years of diplomatic experience and 2 years of hard-won wisdom about the price of ignoring evil in the name of peace. The debates were fierce, emotional, and sometimes nearly violent. The Zelkani delegation demanded the complete extermination of all Kitharans. The Morvani wanted to claim former Kitharan territory for themselves. The Thakai insisted that humanity should rule as the new galactic power. Elena listened to them all, then stood to address the assembly. "We have a choice," she said simply. "We can replace the Kitharan Empire with something just as oppressive, or we can build something better, something that honors the billions who died for the crime of being weaker than their oppressors." The accord that emerged was imperfect but unprecedented. Rather than creating a new empire, the galaxy would be governed by a confederation of free worlds. Each species would maintain sovereignty over their homeworlds while cooperating on issues of trade, defense, and justice. War crimes tribunals would hold accountable those responsible for genocide, but entire species would not be punished for the crimes of their rulers. Former Kitharan slave castes would be granted full citizenship and representation in the new galactic government. Most importantly, humanity formally rejected any role as galactic emperor. "We learned what happens when one species claims dominion over others," Elena told the assembly. "We will never repeat that mistake." The final ceremony took place 1 year after the last Kitharan surrender. Elena stood before a memorial wall on New Harmony that contained the names of every known victim of Kitharan processing. The wall stretched for miles across the planet's main continent. Black stone covered with names in hundreds of languages. Representatives from every liberated species had gathered for the dedication. Former slaves stood beside former enemies. Kitharan citizens who had helped in the liberation stood beside species their empire had nearly exterminated. Elena approached the central podium, carrying a data crystal containing the final casualty reports. The numbers still made her sick to read. 47 species completely exterminated. 15.7 billion individual beings processed for biological materials. 890 worlds stripped of their original cultures. And added to that list, 2.3 million human casualties from the 2-year war that could have been prevented if the galaxy had acted sooner. "We gather here to remember," Elena said, her voice carrying across the vast memorial ground. "Not just those we lost, but what their deaths teach us about the price of willful blindness." She activated the data crystal, and the memorial wall began displaying images of the extinct species. Beings that had once created art, music, poetry, and philosophy. Civilizations that had reached for the stars only to be cut down by predators who saw them as nothing more than resources. For 15 years, humanity offered peace to the Kitharan Empire, Elena continued. "We believed that patient diplomacy could solve any problem. We thought that showing kindness would inspire kindness in return. We were wrong." A murmur went through the crowd. Some had criticized Elena and humanity for not acting sooner, for allowing diplomatic courtesy to delay military action. "But we were not wrong to offer peace," Elena said. "We were wrong to confuse patience with surrender. We were wrong to mistake kindness for weakness. We were wrong to believe that evil would restrain itself if we simply asked politely enough." Elena looked out over the assembled representatives. Former enemies who had learned to work together. Former slaves who had found their voices. Former oppressors who had learned the meaning of justice. "The memorial behind me lists the names of those we could not save," Elena said. "But in front of me stand the living proof that their sacrifice was not meaningless. You are the future they died to protect. You are the peace they paid for with their lives." Elena stepped back from the podium and activated the memorial's final feature. Throughout the night sky above New Harmony, holographic images appeared, showing the homeworlds of every extinct species. For one night, their lights would shine again among the stars. Admiral Chen found Elena hours later, sitting alone beside the memorial wall. The ceremony had ended, but Elena remained, reading names by the light of artificial stars. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked gently. Elena touched one of the names carved into the stone. a Zelkani scientist who had been working on a cure for a genetic disease when the Ketherans captured her. She had been processed 3 days before the Liberation Forces arrived at her facility. "I regret that we didn't understand sooner," Elena said. "I regret that we mistook diplomatic courtesy for moral obligation. I regret that we learned too late the difference between peace and surrender, but not the attempt at peace itself." Elena stood and looked up at the artificial stars. "No. The attempt was right. The universe should be a place where different species can meet in friendship rather than fear, where disputes are solved with words rather than weapons, where the strong protect the weak instead of preying on them. That's what we're building now," Sarah pointed out. "The Accord creates exactly that kind of galaxy." Elena nodded. "But it only exists because we were finally willing to fight for it. Real peace isn't the absence of conflict, Sarah. It's the presence of justice. And justice sometimes requires good people to do terrible things to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Elena took one last look at the memorial wall. Tomorrow, she would return to the endless work of building a better galaxy. There would be more crises, more difficult decisions, more species learning to trust each other after generations of oppression. But tonight, under the light of remembered stars, Elena allowed herself to hope that the billions of names on that wall had not died in vain, that their sacrifice had purchased something precious and rare, a galaxy where offering peace would not be mistaken for offering submission. The age of empires was over. The age of justice had begun, and if humanity had learned anything from 15 years of failed diplomacy, it was that true peace could only exist when those who would destroy it knew that good people were prepared to stop them. The stars above continued their silent vigil, lighting the way toward a future that the dead had died to make possible. Elena walked away from the memorial, knowing that their watch was ended. The living would take it from here.